Welcome to Rising Stars, where Miriam Knight, publisher of New Consciousness Review, interviews exciting new voices in the world of progressive and transformational books, films, and ideas, who offer intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us as we celebrate the conscious awakening and explore many expressions of consciousness in action.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Miriam Knight, and my guest today is Dinan. Stephen is a noted social entrepreneur and visionary political strategist. He's the founder and CEO of the Shift Network, a leading global provider of online transformational courses and trainings. He was previously a senior staffer for both the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, and the Esalen Institute. At IONS, he was the driving force behind the Shift in Action program, and at Esalen, he directed and helped to create the Center for Theory and Research, a think tank for scholars, researchers, and teachers to explore human potential frontiers. He's a graduate of Stanford University and a member of the Transformational Leadership Council and the Evolutionary Leaders Group. Today, we're going to discuss his latest book, Sacred America, Sacred World, Fulfilling Our Mission in Service to All. I'm delighted to welcome him to the show. Welcome, Stephen.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the warm welcome, Miriam.
Well, I so much enjoyed reading your book. There's so much compassion and inclusivity in it that you really feel it was written out in that proverbial field beyond all notions of right and wrong that Rumi describes. Tell me what you're hoping to awaken with this work.
Well, on the deepest level, I feel that we have sometimes created a separation between our spiritual practices, our personal growth, and the evolution of our democracy. And I really fundamentally believe that in order for us to evolve a more enlightened world, which I think all of us can be aligned with, we have to actually enlighten our society and the way that we go about governing ourselves. And so many people who are on a path of spiritual growth and development can avoid going into the public sphere because it can feel very toxic, very polarizing. It can feel very tough, actually, to get involved in a way that feels like it's healing. So I'm really writing this book both to mainstream political leaders as well as people who are coming out of a more mainstream perspective, but also people who are on a path of personal growth and development to really see that there is a way to engage the evolution of our democracy and to make that part of how we show up in the world, but in a way that's more unifying, that's more holistic, that's about focusing on solutions. It's about political cross-training where we really start to understand different perspectives than our own, that we see our political engagement as an opportunity to grow still more in our compassion, our empathy, our wisdom for how do we live a good life on this planet. And so when the side benefit of that is it also that if without it, we're really potentially in a lot of trouble on the planet. And so we have to evolve our political system if we're going to be able to address the various crises we face in time. And I think that we have to do so in a way that's more unifying, that's more respectful, that's ultimately grounded in a kind of sacred reverence for life.
Well, I think what we see playing out in our political life is the very opposite of what you describe. It's extreme polarization and lack of civility. And we can see how it totally short-circuits getting anything done. So what you're trying to build notionally in the book and as a suggestion for upcoming leaders is the groundwork for bridging this divide, bridging the polarity that really is totally handicapping the progress that we need to make at this time. Now, I was really impressed with your story of how you went from fervent progressive to someone who really has come to appreciate the values associated with conservatives and how imperative it is to bridge this divide. What were some of the insights that you had along the way that mellowed you and brought you to this understanding?
Well, I really see it ultimately as an outgrowth of a deeper commitment to oneness, to the spiritual principles that so many of us have learned. I mean, with OMTimes, you are speaking to a very spiritual audience, and so, we really, at the foundation and root of, there's a recognition that we are divine beings and that we live in this divine world, and that we are here as stewards of what's happening, as well as taking opportunities to grow and evolve, and so. All of that sounds really good until we then go over to the political sphere, and then we often evoke a whole different side of ourselves, often disgust and hatred. Even the most spiritually oriented of my friends can get into this, and a lot of anger and animosity. And so I just, at a certain point, recognized that was just not really serving. And so I decided to take it on as a practice for myself to go beyond my own visceral disgust and dismay at different political leaders, and really connect with them as human beings, and see how they can see the world in a certain way and understand their divine role in a way in the evolution of our planet. Doesn't mean I necessarily always agree with them, and I think it's important to still be discerning and to take positions and stands based upon what we believe is right. But to do so in a way where we're not alienating ourselves from the other, or the whoever the other represents. So a good example was with Sarah Palin when she was the 2008 nominee for vice president. She really got under my skin, and I found her just like nails on a chalkboard listening to her. So I undertook it as a practice to read both of her books, and eventually out of that whole journey, I've ended up writing a Huffington Post article about this that was called "Dissolving the Palin Prejudice." And so in the course of that journey, I began to humanize her in different ways and understand her upbringing and her values and choices that she had made that were very hard, that actually I respected, and ways that she had challenged the Old Boys Network in Alaska. And it basically kind of helped to take some of the edge off what I had been seeing, and really appreciate her as her own unique being. And so I wrote this article about the journey and what I could appreciate through the book. And my progressive friends were generally horrified that I'd done this, but that I got a lot of fan mail from conservatives. And what I learned from that, a lot of the conservatives felt seen and respected and honored in a way because they were so identifying with what Sarah represented for them, and that they were fans of that. And so when progressives were were denigrating her and attacking her and demeaning her, they took it on as like a personal insult. And so there was a way in which people were feeling more shut down, more alienated, more dug in, more resistant, more negative than actually served. And that we see that kind of poison in the system paralyzing a lot of forward momentum in our government right now. And so each time that we go into attack mode and start to diminish another political leader, we have to remember that it's not just about that leader, it's all the people who support them. And all those people, do we want to alienate ourselves from a good chunk of the human family? Do we want to really create a schism in our own heart and with others? And ultimately, I think as people on a path of growth and development, we have to get to the place of opening our heart to all of humankind. So politics allows us a pretty intense practice ground, because the issues are charged, the debates are charged, the attacks are charged, to enter into that in a way that's not demonizing people, but really just taking a stand for what the world we want to create and to help evolve the process. So as part of my practice this year with the book, I went to both the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention. At the Republican, I was participating in something called the Purple Tent, which is finding the higher common grounds between red and blue. So purple equals red plus blue. And it was really quite illuminating and interesting and fascinating. So even while there's a lot of on the surface, there's more polarization and a kind of violent polarization than ever before. I think we're seeing the outgrowth of decades of development of more and more segmented society where we're more polarized against the other. So I think we can't get to the solutions that really are required to evolve and to repair our democracy until we soften those divides, until we create those bridges. And so I've been interested in creating more bridges and connections with conservatives this year, even as I'm taking a stand for being a Democrat as well.
Well, in a sense, the extreme positions of Donald Trump, I think, are perhaps paving the way for more purple to emerge as people are pulling away from the extremism. And
I think there's a truth in that. Yeah. The opportunity this year is for an upgrade of not just who we elect, but how we elect, and to recognize some of the dysfunctions that are on display this year, and the damage that causes in our population, and some of the sort of the violence that does to our people, and the rates of bullying has gone way up on school playgrounds this whole year, and there's a way in which it leaves people kind of wounded and broken and misunderstood, and so when we're seeing such an exaggerated version of that, and it's not just coming from the Republican side. It's also been very evident on the Democratic side, and it's been more there's been a lot of that intense polarization energy between Bernie supporters and Hillary. When there's that level of stridency in the air and level of attack and demonization, it's like that people, Hillary for prison and Donald Trump is crazy, and it's just like there's using some of the basest insults we have. It basically degrades our whole public discourse to another level, and we all pay the price because we're not creating the real solutions to. There's a lot of things we need to do. We need to get the money out of politics. We need to prevent gerrymandering. We need to clean up the whole voting process to make sure that everybody's enfranchised and that there's clarity around the vote. There's banking reforms we need to do. There's things that we have to do with up-leveling the military. There's a lot of significant things because America is a major force on the world stage. We have 37% of the world's military. We've got 22% of the world's economy. We have so much of the media is shaped here. So when we're dysfunctional, we create dysfunction on a planetary scale, and so the dysfunction in American democracy has a huge impact on the world.
Well, that's the signal for our station break. We're speaking with Stephen Dinan about Sacred America, Sacred World. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hi everyone, this is Shay Parker, the host of Best of the Best, which airs live right here on IOM Radio every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm super excited to bring you expert guest hosts, spiritual discussions, free psychic readings, and so much more. I can promise that you will not want to miss this one-of-a-kind, fun, yet touching, down-to-earth show. Join us every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific on OTR-FM. This is Shay Parker, and I can't wait to see you there.
Mother, Mother Ocean.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Buffett. West Indian manatees are one of the most unique animals on Earth, and we're still finding out so many new things about them. But manatees are endangered, and many of them are killed or injured each year because of watercraft collisions or other human activities. You can help save these gentle marine mammals. For free tips on what you can do, call Save the Manatee Club at 1-800-432-JOIN. Thank you.
Welcome back. I'm Miriam Knight speaking with Stephen Dinan about his book, Sacred America, Sacred World. And the website for the book is, Stephen, what is it?
SacredAmerica.net.
Sacred America. .net, right. So before the break, we were talking about the extreme positions of both the progressive and the conservative side. Now, you have some fascinating suggestions on an evolutionary change for both the Democratic and the Republican side, although you go more deeply into the Democratic descriptions. How did you come to be part of this? I think you would call it a transpartisan movement?
Yeah, it's something that's emerged over the recent years and become a stronger force. So just more and more people, particularly people who are on a path of growth and development, recognizing that there is this deeper ground, a unifying ground that brings us together as citizens and really as human beings. That is far deeper than party loyalty, and that if we get too caught up in party loyalties and positions, that it can actually create tears in the fabric of our human connectedness. And so, the transpartisan movement has a lot of different people and wings in there. There's people from like Joan Blades who's one of the co-founders of Move On, has created living room conversations. We just did an American Citizen Summit online that featured many different pioneers. There's people who are looking at media bias, and all sides looks at like how the bias is playing out in different sides. And there's a lot of really great initiatives that basically are focused on how do we create a more conscious way of doing democracy. And it doesn't mean, a transpartisan doesn't mean you let go of any identification with a particular orientation. You can be a transpartisan progressive and a transpartisan Republican, a transpartisan libertarian, transpartisan green. It really is about, First of all, committing to a level of discourse that is more growthful, and that we learn from each other, and that sometimes the challenge of different political positions is the raw material for us to go to the next level. So, the secret sauce of America is to hold the unity and diversity at the same time. And we have such a diverse country with so many different cultural streams and religious streams and ideologies, and so when we can hold all of that with sufficient unity, then the diversity is healthy and growthful and helps us go to the next level. But if it breaks down and we descend into different kinds of warfare with each other, then it really becomes dysfunctional. So I'm speaking to how we have to spend more of our time on the reunifying and what brings us together, rather than what separates us now, because we've gotten so separated into different camps, and we're stratified by class. There's a lot of class warfare. There's the cultural wars around between African Americans, and the police culture right now is really strong. There's the whole schism with Islam is also big. So I think it's important for those of us who care about this to make demonstrations and outreach about bridging those divides. So one of those divides is around left-right and Democrat-Republican. And so for us to take seriously having deep conversations, having healing conversations that can be about politics rather than simply just locating their own little ghetto of people who think like us. Same thing applies with other divides. So how do we both honor the difficult job of being a police officer and the requirement to have law and order with the real oppression that African Americans have felt, and to do reforms that help to alleviate that, and that's an important part of our shadow work as a country. And the same thing with the world of Islam. It's like, how do we create more bridges of understanding with the world of Islam rather than descend into more polarization and demonization? And so each time there's been a cycle of escalation of fear around terrorism, I often will make micro loans to women entrepreneurs in Islamic countries, just as a little signal of like, hey, we got your back. There are Americans who care about you, and that this is not something we want to inflame. So it's very easy and often more provocative to pour more, fan the flames of various divides, and it gets a lot of media attention. But it ultimately leaves us worse off, and it really also betrays the need for real solutions that go beyond partisan divides. When we can cross those divides, we actually create better solutions. As an example, Van Jones is working. He's a prominent progressive activist and has built some bridges. Is now working on criminal justice reform with Newt Gingrich, an initiative called Cut 50, which is looking to reduce prison populations by 50%. So when we can find these little bridge points,
and
where
they've actually been having quite a bit of success too, haven't they?
Oh yeah, no. In fact, that's one of the areas where transpartisan work is really getting a lot of traction, is criminal justice reform, because there's strong motivations on the left and strong motivations on the right to really address a system that we imprison more people as a percentage than pretty much any other country in the world, except for maybe a few, really oppressive authoritarian regimes.
One of the things that you bring out so beautifully in your book are all the myriad initiatives for doing good, like the collaboration you were just talking about, like Kiva, there was some educational intervention group that would go in for one day to schools that you described and make a real change in the bullying.
Yeah, that's called Challenge Day. That's a great group that's worked with, I think, over a million students in different schools. They have a one-day intervention that helps to shift the school culture that's more based upon cliques and bullying and misunderstanding to one that's really, people really get cracked open and open their hearts and do some healing work. And it's been a very proven intervention that people like Oprah Winfrey have gotten on board with. So there's, in every part of our society, there are remarkable breakthrough solutions, and I think we need to put more of our attention on those, because when we really see a solution working, there's an opportunity to amplify it and connect the dots with other places. Just as an example, in the realm of banking, there's a lot of complaints about the banking sector and the extent to which finances dominate our economy and kind of become this tapeworm sucking the life force out of the economy. And I agree with a lot of those, but there's not as much focus on, well, what are the real solutions? And so one solution that I think is fascinating is public banks. There's a whole movement around creating public banks that fund infrastructure development, that fund small businesses, but that also are designed as profit-making engines. And when they make profit, it goes back to the people. So in North Dakota, there's a Bank of North Dakota. Interestingly enough, North Dakota is mainly a Republican state and Republican legislature, but they have this public bank that operates in parallel with private banks, and it really helps to do a lot of the things that we're wanting the financial sector to do, but the private banks don't necessarily take on. And so as a result, North Dakota weathered the economic recession that we had better than any other state, and they have lower taxes. The people get money back through the public bank because of its when it makes a profit on loans, it ends up getting returned back to the people. So it's a great innovation. Wow. And, people don't even hear about that. I've talked to different political leaders like Gavin Newsom in California, and he'd never heard of the Bank of North Dakota. But I said, well, why don't we have a Bank of California? And there is a whole movement of people that's working to activate public banks in different sectors and cities. And so it's a great example of something that can be very much shared common ground between left and right, and gives us opportunity to have some wins rather than just argue and stalemate each other over where the areas where we don't necessarily agree on the highest level of policy, but we can build momentum off these smaller wins that then build and scale and replicate.
One of the things that you said that really hit home to me when, for example, you said that you set out to read Sarah Palin's books because you realized that you had such an antipathy towards her. In our normal daily lives, we don't have the opportunity, by and large, to connect with people of a different faith or different culture or different political opinions. We tend to just go within our own circles that we feel comfortable in. So you're putting the onus on the individual to make that effort to get out and inform yourself and connect. That's what I like.
It doesn't have to be overwhelming either. It's like I like to go to realclearpolitics.com every day, and I try to read a couple articles from the left, or from the right rather, because I tend to read more things from the left. It's more resonant with my worldview. But if you don't read what people are thinking differently, it's like you can just end up with a lot of untested assumptions, and you also language issues in a certain way. So another problem that develops is a lot of language has gotten very polarized into left or right, and it's sort of like, well, peace building, well, that's a left thing, and security, that's a right thing. And so you end up with this kind of different language being spoken and different realms of evidence being cited about different things as well. So just spending some time every day reading a little bit from somebody who thinks differently. I've ordered books from people who are more ordered a book called Liberal Fascism recently as a way to understand why what it was on the right about the way in which liberal agendas were being advanced that felt so dissonant. And so he makes the case there's a connection between liberalism and fascism and the imposition of certain values on conservatives that they're not wanting. And so, it's useful to kind of spend a little time thinking about the world from that perspective. And then it opens up a deeper level of sensitivity and why people might react to different things. And potentially points to better solutions. Because when we can talk about potential solutions from a multiplicity of viewpoints, we're going to be more successful. So if we're talking to somebody on the left about $15 an hour minimum wage, we might say it's really about uplifting the poor and having people have dignity and self-respect and preventing the exploitation of the companies. You're talking to somebody on the right, you might say, having a higher minimum wage means fewer people need fewer subsidies, and we decrease the size of the federal bureaucracy, we decrease the tax burden, and we basically ensure that people who are working full-time have enough money that we don't have to subsidize them. And so that's more of a right-leaning argument, but it actually opens to a different kind of listening. So when I was at the Republican National Convention, I was on a panel with Grover Norquist, and I'm not an expert on gun issues at all, but I've been appalled at how they've been stalled. Like any real progress has been stalled for some time. So we were dialoguing on the panel about what is it that's frozen up in the whole gun debate, and I kind of got there's this whole thing around confiscation. The liberals are essentially running an agenda to confiscate the guns that are protected by the Second Amendment. And I could see that there was all this charge around the word confiscation. And it helped me understand that for somebody who really is deeply committed to owning a gun, that the idea of having that taken away is an existential threat. It brings up really primal security issues. And so anything about confiscation is going to essentially just shut down any sort of debate. So, we didn't come to necessarily agreement on it, but I was just interested in exploring, well, what can we focus on around responsible gun ownership? So how can we increase responsibility? So it's, sometimes languaging can be helpful if we take these different perspectives.
Not to mention actually listening. Too often we just kind of shut down. Well, we're going to take another break, and then we'll be right back with Stephen Dinan talking about Sacred America, Sacred World.
Free your mind with OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Have you wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
There is no death, only a change of worlds. Chief Seattle. Deborah Livingston is an award-winning intuitive psychic medium whose international services include mediumship, spiritual assessment, animal communication, and spiritual mentoring. She is a published author and a trained shaman. Deborah provides evidential messages from spirit and departed loved ones. Learn more at deblivemedium.com. That's DEBLIV medium.com.
Hi, this is Christina Ricci with RAIN. Every 2 minutes, another American is sexually assaulted. If you or someone you know has been sexually assaulted, you are not alone. Help is just a call or click away through the National Sexual Assault Hotline. Please call 1-800-656-HOPE, that's HOPE, or visit RAIN.org, that's RAINN.org.
Brought to you by RAIN and this station.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with Stephen Dinan about Sacred America, Sacred World, and you could find out more about the book at sacredamerica.net. Stephen, your discussion about engagement with the political process really hit home to me when you described your visit to Washington and how you found the staffers of the various Congress people very responsive. What do we need to do as citizens to claim the power that we want?
Well, one of the things it was a wake-up for me, was just shifting from strictly focusing our political energy on electing people who think like us to empowering the people who are already in office to do a better job. And that's what really the function of what some people call citizen lobbying, that we're there to build a bridge to the offices and staff of our congressional leaders, and it can happen on a local level too, and state level, that we take the time to build some bridges. And then we can be a voice for particular positions when different bills come up that we feel passionately about, or sometimes sharing stories of like why something is really important. It can give them it can give them an excuse or a motive or rather a story that's going to help them tell the larger story publicly. So sometimes if they're like, well, one of my constituents told me X, that could be very powerful in helping them shift a debate in a positive direction. So we've learned a lot from the Friends Committee on National Legislation. It's a Quaker-based group, but they're open to others. And so we've brought quite a number of people that aren't Quakers to also participate. There's an annual conference where they train you on citizen lobbying and really give you best practices, and then you go and lobby, usually for peace-oriented themes. That's in November. You can find it at fcnl.org. And so what I found so refreshing about it is they have a spiritual basis to it. There's a way in which going into silence is part of the Quaker practice, and there's a strong unifying element that they're really trying to be respectful with everybody. So they're working with Republicans and Democrats, and they're advocating for a whole range of different policy shifts and legislation. But they do so in a really respectful way, and it does move the needle. We had definitely as a group had a big impact on the adoption of the Iran deal that prevents Iran from getting nuclear weapons, and I really feel like that was a building block towards creating more peace and stability in the Middle East. And this group of 450 people or so had a big impact on that. And so one of the things you learn is it's not just about influencing the political leader. It's often about making a connection with staffers, because the staff people are the ones who have to drill down and really get up to speed in different areas. The candidates or the representatives themselves are often have to spend a lot of time in committees and fundraising and jetting around and speaking, and so they don't have a lot of time to get really deeply up on the issues. So if you want to help to influence legislation in a positive direction, then it's getting to know the staffers can actually be more valuable. So that's kind of one of those paradigm shifts of like thinking of, my participation democracy is all about electing people that I like or that think like me, to, you know what, whoever's in office, even if we're a Democrat and we have a Republican representative or senator, to sort of take the time to get connected in a respectful way, work with a group like FCNL to learn more how to do that. And that actually helps the democracy work better, because then we're sort of a voice of the people that's an antidote to some of the distorting influences of paid professional lobbyists as well.
How do we get money out of politics? Do you think that's a hope in our lifetime?
I think it's inevitable, frankly, because what happens with the American people is that we can be a little bit apathetic until something gets dramatic, and then we'll move into action and really take it on. And there was a guy named Cenk Uygur who's from the Young Turks, and he makes a great point that pretty much every generation has had a constitutional amendment, and it's really so there's nothing unusual about creating a constitutional amendment. We just need to build enough momentum for it. There's probably 90% or more of the U.S. population already wants to get some of the big money out of politics. Doesn't mean you have to get all of it out. I mean, you can still have people making $100 contributions to candidates, but just the level of distortion from big money right now is clearly compromising our democracy. So I believe that we will be able to get it. It takes some patience and long-term work. It may require going state by state, as Wolfpack, the organization that Cenk Uygur started, is working on. It may be able to happen if they're in the next Congress, if things swing more to the Democrats' side, because they've really made a commitment to end for a constitutional amendment to end Citizens United to be legislated, so that it's possible it might happen there. But I think that the deeper principle is to, first of all, always look back historically. We've overcome slavery. That was a monster challenge that many people worked for decades on and thought would never be able to overcome. And getting women the right to vote was also, multiple generations and just a certain tenacity there. So will we be able to eventually get the money out of politics and have a constitutional amendment to do so? I believe we will, and it's just based on our history. Is like we do wake up, we do get engaged, when the stakes are high enough and it's serious enough.
Well, I'm glad you sound so encouraged. If we're talking about serious problems, how about climate change? Why do you think that it was so rejected out of hand by the conservatives? Was it simply the influence of the oil companies, or was there something deeper?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of complexity in that. I think that there's some worldview clashes that are going on in terms of sort of having a more science-based reality, and science has kind of unfortunately become more of like the left-wing approach to things. And so I really believe that a more mature Republican Party has to take just as seriously the importance of science. And I think part of what's going to happen this year, ideally, is that there is going to be a reboot for the Republican Party after the Trump phenomenon. I think there's a real sincere soul searching that's going to be going on about like what is the future of the Republican Party after all of what's transpired this year. And I think that out of that could emerge a more enlightened right. And so in the book I go into what does a more enlightened right look like, what does a more enlightened left look like. I'm not saying that we're going to erase the political differences, but they get to be more mature, they get to be more sophisticated, they get to be more whole and transpartisan in different ways. And so I think that embracing science is something that's going to happen on the right, and not to see that as a political football to play with, but it's more like really important information for good decision making. So, and I think, part of that is because there's the academia has been sort of left leaning. Then the Republicans, because there's this warfare psychology, they're saying, okay, well that's just their team in a way, rather than saying this is actually something that's important for all of us.
Mm. There's a book called I'm Right and You're an Idiot by James Hogan, who was talking about the different ways that the conservatives versus the progressives tend to process information. So he's suggesting that the progressives process it in a very logical, evidence-based argument, whereas the conservatives are more emotional, trigger-based. And I think there's a lot to that, and it kind of backs up what you were saying about the issues regarding gun control, for example, and possibly even climate change.
Yeah. Well, and so part of it is also to get more sophisticated about that. So if we're talking about if we're talking about gun control, like instead of talking about gun control, we talk about gun responsibility, and that's sort of feels more grounded. And so language like, control immediately brings up certain, a paradigm of constriction or imposition, or so there's like that can trigger an emotional response. If we're talking about the planet, so, global warming, oftentimes, there's been more progress, I think, on the right using framing like creation care, for instance. Creation care is ultimately about ensuring that we're taking care of the creation that God has given us, and so that's part of our duty as people who are serving the higher will. So that kind of a framing can get more traction than the essentially. On the left, there tends to be a way that we don't necessarily bring in the sacred component to things in as clear a way. So I think that really having a sacred relationship with the planet is important, and people have different frameworks for how they do that. On the left, there tends to be a little more of a kind of a religious, spiritual but not religious, tends to be more common, and so that to relate to the planet as sort of just as a ascension entity, whereas on the right it's a little more about dominion in a sense that we're given dominion over the planet and the animals and the people, but to do so in a way that's righteous and responsible, and that ultimately is expressing care for creation. Like that has a different kind of quality to it, and so. And I think also on the left there's a tendency sometimes to drop the human side of the equation, just focus on animals that are endangered or potentially going extinct, and not to focus on what about the loggers who do need to have a job or a livelihood, and so to just polarize against that. So to try to really build in thinking about everybody and taking and caring for everybody, because the more we can genuinely care for everybody, even those on the other side of a divide, it's gonna not trigger as many emotions as well. So if the right tends to make more decisions from the emotional standpoint, we want to engage them in a way that's more respectful and honoring and ultimately healing, because otherwise you're going to get more dug in.
Sure. Comes back to compassion and respect. Well, we're going into our last break, and then we'll be back with our final segment of Stephen Dinan talking about Sacred America, Sacred World. We'll be right back.
Bringing you the best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio, your conscious lifestyle on steroids. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Join me, Maggie Chula, on Mondays at noon Eastern for Mastermind with Maggie. Let's work together in a mastermind. We can resolve life's problems and create goals for the future. Build action steps empowering you to create your life in partnership with your divine source of light, your soul. Manifesting your goals can be simple and easy, so come with your problems and leave with a plan. The Akashic Master Teachers and I are waiting to help you.
Hi, this is Carly Simon for LifeBeat. The music industry fights AIDS. The AIDS crisis isn't over. There have been amazing scientific breakthroughs, but people are still dying, and your local AIDS organization needs your help more now than ever. Volunteer and make a difference.
Welcome back. I'm Miriam Knight speaking with Stephen Dinan. Stephen, we're talking about the use of language, and you were talking about framing one's political discourse or really any kind of outreach in a way that the other side can relate to, which is essentially what politicians do all the time, except they call it spin. And it's
I think there's a difference between spin can be dishonest. I think there's a way of in a way, it's more like translating into different language systems. Is I would say it's more accurate.
I totally agree. But the purpose in both cases is to get into the head of the person you're speaking to, speaking with, instead of just speaking to. And that's the real secret sauce here, is bridging that divide between me and thee and trying to understand why you are reacting the way you are reacting. What is important to you? What are your values? And this is not just on an individual or a community level, but it's also on an international level. And you go into the idea of a global government of some kind. I know it's a nasty word to certain people, the New World Order, but you explain that. I think I'd like you to go into that a bit, because that really is the next big challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I felt it was important in this book to also look at some of the long-range developments, to sort of also look at them with a more objective eye. And so one of the things that tends to be a big bugaboo in a lot of different quarters is any sort of globalization, the forces of globalization. So I really make the case that we are moving into, we are in a global era. We have global media, we have global internet, we have global trade, we have global transnational corporations. We have everything is becoming globalized in different ways. And so what that does is it means that we have a lot of emergent challenges that it requires global thinking to address. And so we've had some of that with the Paris Accords on climate, for instance. But we don't have a structure right now beyond the United Nations of actually having elected representation to be kind of global problem solvers. So I talk about it in the form of long-term thinking about what does it look like to have a World Congress that is protected from lobbying influence, that has limited decision-making, maybe 5% of the decision-making of the larger world. It's only from democratically elected states, so it's very so the whole thing is intrinsically democratic, and there's built-in feedback loops so that people have a more direct pipeline to provide feedback on via smartphones what's actually happening in that global Congress. Or World Congress. And so the idea there is to first of all recognize that it's a natural outgrowth. When you've got globalized everything else, if you don't have some form of limited, effective, democratic global governance, basically you're abdicating some of those roles. So the transnational corporations can play different countries off each other, and they can drive us towards more environmental degradation right now, because each government can't really control what they're up to. They can just locate wherever they want, and they're playing different ones off each other. Same thing with finance. As finance comes in and out of countries and can wreck different economies, and it's largely outside of any sort of state control right now. So we're seeing a lot of globalization of certain sectors of society, but unless we also have a parallel growth in ability to create some checks and balances on that, they can become really damaging. So, and it's also, I think that if we step out of our fear place around it, it's a natural outgrowth that we, like with the United States of America, it's like we started off as 13 colonies. The Articles of Confederation were very fearful of any centralization of power. So the federal government basically didn't exist, didn't have the ability to create, much of anything. And so it was kind of dysfunctional. So we actually became a healthier, stronger nation by uniting the states and keeping some of their rights and powers into a larger confederation that became the United States of America. And then as we've expanded from 13 states to 50 states, it keeps strengthening us economically, culturally, in different ways. And that the more that we can move towards that slowly but surely, moving towards more regional accords, there's a European Union, increasing African Union, there's a Southeast Asian Union. There's these kind of regional groups that are getting more and more aligned more and more peaceful, more and more collaborative, less and less boundaries, that we're going to eventually do that on a global scale. And to not be afraid of that, but to think about it in a thoughtful way and design it so that it doesn't create the sort of fear scenarios that people are worried about.
Well, what we have now is almost a de facto global government amongst the elite megacorporations and the financial system. So this would be the only way that we could counterbalance that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's just, and so what I'm trying to do in the book is not to go into a lot of details on that. In fact, I just do one chapter on it out of 34 or so chapters. But I think it's important for us to make it an acceptable part of the discourse and not just be like, oh, it's like all that one world government fearful thing. It's more like, this is actually, it's sensible as a long-term strategy to have this as part of how we're thinking we create a really healthy, peaceful, sustainable world.
But that's really the theme of the book, as above, so below, if you will. As on the global level, so it is on the local level. And if we don't get engaged as citizens, and if we don't inform ourselves and understand what's going on and listen to each other, then we just throw up our hands and allow the status quo to go in whatever chaotic direction it wants.
Right. So I think we're in a stage where we've got to activate a vision for a really, truly healthy America, one that's more enlightened, that's in service to the greater good, that's truly global, and also thinking, it's not just global governance, but really thinking more globally about how do we solve our challenges. So instead of, we have to create peace in the world is not going to happen just through the military. We have to also really be proactive about helping to diffuse conflicts, to help to build up economies that are broken, to help to heal historical wounds, and that actually creates a different kind of security. Same thing with global warming. It's like with environmental threats rising, it's like it's a different kind of security if we make sure that the planet can actually have enough resources to survive, and that other countries do. That'll help us actually become more secure. So in order to really thrive now in this new era, the global era, we have to think globally and become a globally oriented America that is also an example of health and prosperity and peace and sustainability. That all of these things, we have to bake them in and demonstrate success while we're also being of deep service to other countries and peoples as well.
I loved your description of the microfinance portion of how you saw the fallout of a small loan to buy a sewing machine for some woman who can then support her family, and her son would be less inclined to become a terrorist because he sees that his mother is actually benefiting from Western generosity. I mean, It's all so connected.
I think it's really important we do that, because every time there's a bomb dropped, or even the sort of drones going in and taking out different terrorist leaders, it's like that doesn't just have physical damage, there's psychological damage, and people can get there's a groundswell of negativity. So in the other side, we need to balance things like that with, we're going to be generous with loans and microfinance to help these economies get on their feet, and so I think that microfinance is something that can be a great unifying point for left and right. It's actually a better investment of a lot of our dollars that are supposed to create security if we were to create more and more microfinance funds for around the world for developing entrepreneurs. And most of them pay them back. Kiva.org has a 98 or 99% repayment rate, so you don't even lose the money, but it does help to stimulate a whole another level of self-sufficiency and ultimately gratitude. Some friends of mine are also involved with creating these schools in Kenya, and when you really create a school that's an engine for growth and education of a whole village, then it feeds back on itself. People they become more self-sufficient. There's more gratitude, and these stories of gratitude and development are actually really central to build trust and relationship and natural rapport. Mm-hmm. And so that's ultimately what's going to create the kind of harmonious global world that we know is possible we've got to be doing as much of that or more of that than we are military type interventions.
Well, this book is just so uplifting and positive in its tone. One of my favorite parts of it are the appendices where you have lists of organizations that are doing fantastic things in the world that you never hear about in the day-to-day. Yeah. And it's just so uplifting to know that there are people out there with that vision. You also throw out a lot of little ideas that I just hope will fall upon fertile ground and take root and blossom.
I hope so. I mean, I've gotten a copy of the book to Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and to Michael Steele on the Republican side, various mayors. I signed one to go to Justin Trudeau. I'm interested in planting these seeds wherever possible, and you never know when a good idea is going to filter in and find fertile soil, as you said. So some of our advocacy as citizens can be also just propagating inspiring stories and ideas and possibilities rather than just the kind of gridlocked policies, but finding these things that are like, oh, Bank of North Dakota, or here's a way to do kiva.org, or here's how we could demonstrate peace building in a society, and here's what's happening with Challenge Day in schools.
Right.
All these things they're like all very. I don't believe we need to create a lot of new things. We just need to amplify all the great new innovations we already have.
Absolutely. Well, Stephen Dinan, author of Sacred America, Sacred World, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And be sure to go to his website, sacredamerica.net, and check out the Shift Network while you're at it. I'm Miriam Knight for New Consciousness Review. Thank you for listening. Have a blessed day. Goodbye.